To most people, pastors embody God's word and are revered as pillars of faith and morality. However, that was not the case with this pastor. Behind his public image of righteousness, he hid a dark and twisted secret, one filled with lies, betrayal, and ultimately murder. What happens when the man entrusted with guiding others is the one leading them astray? Jonathan Grayson was once the shining star of his church. People would gather in awe as he delivered sermons that seemed to speak directly to their hearts. His words were powerful, full of hope and inspiration. To the congregation, he was more than a pastor. He was a leader, a symbol of faith, a person they could trust to guide them in their spiritual journeys. His presence in the church was undeniable, and his influence stretched far beyond the walls of the building. But, as with all things, Jonathan's perfect image began to crack. It started with whispers, small rumors that seemed innocent at first but soon became louder and harder to ignore. People began noticing the small inconsistencies in Jonathan's behavior, the late nights, the evasive answers when asked about his whereabouts. The whispers grew, and with them, suspicion. One evening, a church member, a loyal follower who looked up to Jonathan for years, saw something that would shatter everything. As she was passing by a strip club, she spotted Jonathan leaving. Shocked and confused, she couldn't believe her eyes. She had always seen him as a man of integrity, a man who would never be seen in such a place. But there he was, stepping out of a strip club. The news spread quickly, and before long it reached the ears of the church leaders. They couldn't ignore it. Jonathan's once unblemished reputation was tarnished beyond repair. The church immediately dismissed him, not just as their pastor, but as a figure they had once held in high regard. Fired from his position, Jonathan's fall from grace continued. With nowhere else to turn, he found another church willing to take him in. This church, desperate for a pastor, was unaware of his past. Jonathan arrived with a fresh face and new promises of redemption. He convinced them he was ready for a new beginning, and they welcomed him with open arms. But as time passed, the cracks began to show again. His old habits resurfaced. His arrogance, his sense of entitlement, and his refusal to take responsibility for his actions. It wasn't long before the whispers from the past found their way to this new congregation. His time there, too, was cut short. Fired once again, Jonathan found himself on the outside looking in, the doors of every church closing on him. The world he had once controlled was slipping away, and no matter how many times he tried to start over, the weight of his past mistakes followed him. After being fired from several churches, Jonathan Grayson found himself with few options left. His reputation was shattered and no one trusted him. However, he managed to land a job ministering in a local jail. It wasn't the position he had dreamed of, but it was a chance to redeem himself. He told himself that this was his fresh start. He would help others find their way, just as he once did in the church. For a brief moment, it seemed like he was on the right path. He worked with inmates, spoke of change, and seemed to genuinely want to make a difference. However, deep down, Jonathan's true nature hadn't changed. The temptation that had led to his downfall in the past crept back into his life. One day, during a routine session with the female inmates, Jonathan crossed a line. He made an inappropriate advance toward one of the women, a moment of weakness that would cost him everything. The inmate reported the incident, and the authorities quickly took action. Jonathan was arrested. The news spread rapidly, and the once hopeful man who had claimed to be a changed person was now exposed for his actions. He was sentenced to 6 months in jail, a devastating blow that left him reeling. Rebecca, his wife, was heartbroken. She had stood by him through everything, hoping he would eventually change. But this was the final straw. She couldn't stay with a man who had once again proven he couldn't be trusted. With a heavy heart, she packed up their daughters and left, moving away to start fresh, far from Jonathan's chaos. After serving his sentence, Jonathan was determined to rebuild his life. He couldn't stand the thought of being seen as a failure forever. His reputation was in tatters, and his family was gone. but he couldn't accept that this was the end. He needed another chance, another opportunity to prove he had changed. Jonathan was no stranger to manipulation. He had spent years convincing people he was someone he wasn't, so doing it again didn't seem too difficult. Jonathan found a small church looking for a pastor. It wasn't the prestigious position he once held, but it was enough to get his foot back in the door. He didn't mention his past mistakes, carefully omitting his criminal history and the incidents that had led to his downfall. He painted himself as a man who had learned from his mistakes and was now seeking a fresh start. The church, unaware of his past, took him in, giving him the chance he so desperately wanted. At first, Jonathan appeared to be the perfect candidate for the job. He preached with the same charm and passion that had once won over so many. His new congregation seemed to believe in him, and he took full advantage of their trust. He had learned how to manipulate people over the years, and now he was doing it with ease. He smiled, made promises, and said all the right things, all while hiding the truth from those who relied on him. To them, he was the man they had been waiting for, a leader who would guide them to better lives. But Jonathan's biggest manipulation wasn't in the church, it was with Rebecca. Even after all that had happened, he still thought he could convince her to return to him. He knew Rebecca was the key to having a complete family again, and without her, he couldn't fully rebuild his life. So he set his sights on her. He began reaching out to Rebecca, sending her heartfelt messages and apologies. He told her he was a changed man, that his time in prison had made him reflect on his actions, and that he was truly sorry for everything he had done. He promised her he would be different now. He even claimed that his new role in the church was proof he was on the right path. He told her that if she could just give him one more chance, everything would be better. Rebecca was torn. She had been through so much already. She had left him once before, taking the girls and starting fresh, but here he was again, asking for another chance. Deep down, she knew Jonathan hadn't truly changed, but there was something in his words that made her hesitate. She remembered the man she had married, the man who had once been so full of promise. She thought about their daughters and the kind of life she wanted them to have. She didn't want to raise them in a broken home, nor did she want them to grow up without their father. Despite her better judgment, Rebecca agreed to meet with Jonathan. She listened to his apologies, watched the tears in his eyes, and heard the promises of a better future. It wasn't easy for her, but she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, he had changed. She agreed to give him a second chance, not just for him, but for their daughters. She wanted to believe they could have a stable family again, that their past mistakes could be forgiven and forgotten. Jonathan knew exactly how to play his cards. He saw the doubt in Rebecca's eyes, but he also saw the glimmer of hope. He knew how to manipulate her emotions, how to make her feel guilty for questioning his sincerity. And with that, he took advantage of her kindness, giving her just enough to believe in him again. Rebecca moved back in with him, and they tried to rebuild their life together. They played the part of a happy family, at least on the surface. Jonathan was back in the church, and Rebecca, though skeptical, told herself that maybe this time would be different. They spent time together, went to church, and even began to feel like a family again. Jonathan's life appeared to be back on track. He had his family, a steady job at the church, and was slowly rebuilding his reputation. But deep inside, he wasn't content. The thrill of manipulation still lingered, and he longed for more attention, more validation, and more control. He needed something else to keep his life interesting. So Jonathan did what he did best. He created another false identity. He secretly joined a dating app, reinventing himself as an army officer. He presented himself as strong, disciplined, and full of purpose, everything his real life lacked. It wasn't long before he met Vanessa Cole, a kind-hearted, independent woman. Vanessa was everything Jonathan needed, someone who didn't know about his past, someone captivated by the man he pretended to be. Vanessa was drawn to his charm and the convincing stories he told about his life in the army. Jonathan told her he was often away on missions, giving him the perfect excuse to travel. He portrayed himself as a man of integrity and honor, someone deeply dedicated to his work. Vanessa fell for it, believing every word he said. She admired his strength and confidence, and soon they were in regular contact. Vanessa was unaware of his past or the family he had left behind. To her, Jonathan was a man with a promising future, someone who could offer her something new and exciting. To maintain this illusion, Jonathan began traveling frequently, telling Rebecca that his work for the church required him to go on evangelism trips. In reality, he was using the time to meet Vanessa. He booked hotels and spent hours with her, weaving more lies to keep her believing in his fabricated life. For Jonathan, the double life was exhilarating. He enjoyed the excitement of being someone new, someone different. Vanessa believed in the man he pretended to be, but little did she know, the truth about Jonathan's real life was much darker than she could ever imagine. However, Jonathan's life was becoming harder to manage. By day, he was a pastor, fulfilling his duties at the church. By night, he was a husband, trying to keep up appearances with Rebecca. And all the while, he was secretly seeing Vanessa, living a life of lies. The constant juggling of these roles was starting to take a toll on him, but he couldn't stop. The thrill of deception kept him going. Rebecca began to notice the changes. Jonathan was gone more often, his explanations always vague. He claimed he was busy with church work or traveling for evangelism, but something felt off. She sensed that something wasn't right, but she didn't confront him. She feared conflict, the possibility that their fragile family might fall apart again. So she kept her suspicions to herself, hoping that things would somehow return to normal. Meanwhile, Vanessa was growing more attached to Jonathan. After 5 years of dating, Jonathan proposed to Vanessa. The words came out effortlessly, and Vanessa was overjoyed. To her, it was the next step in their perfect love story, a culmination of the happiness she believed they had built together. Around the same time, the church organized a charity event that captured the congregation's attention. The event was unique, a demonstration of firearms as part of a safety awareness initiative. Jonathan, eager to maintain his image as a devoted member of the church, volunteered to assist. The event provided Jonathan with the perfect opportunity. He was given access to firearms, a detail that initially seemed harmless. Acting as though he was merely fulfilling his duties, he transported the weapons back to the church office. But beneath the surface, Jonathan's intentions were far more sinister. When he returned home, Rebecca immediately noticed the firearms. The sight struck her as odd, but Jonathan, ever the manipulator, downplayed the situation. He explained casually that the church had asked him to store them temporarily for safety. His explanation was smooth and convincing, but Rebecca couldn't shake a nagging sense of unease. Jonathan, sensing her doubts, quickly took control of the situation. Flashing his practiced charm, he asked her to help him carry the firearms inside. Despite her reservations, Rebecca reluctantly agreed, unaware that she was unwittingly playing a part in a deadly plan. Once inside the house, Jonathan's intentions became disturbingly clear. His movements were calculated, his resolve unshaken. In a moment of cold determination, he acted without hesitation. Rebecca's shock and confusion in those final moments revealed the depth of his betrayal, a betrayal she had never imagined possible. The house fell into an eerie silence, the weight of the tragedy hanging heavy in the air. Jonathan stood motionless, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the scene. His actions were swift, and there was no trace of remorse. In his mind, Rebecca was no longer a partner, but an obstacle, one he had now eliminated. Without hesitation, Jonathan reached for his phone and dialed the police. His voice was steady as he reported the incident, claiming the gun had gone off accidentally. He spun a story of a tragic mishap, crafting it with enough detail and confidence to make it believable. When the police arrived, Jonathan guided them through the house with a calm demeanor. His account of the events matched the evidence at hand, and his composed manner made it difficult to suspect foul play. For now, the truth remained hidden, shrouded by his web of lies. Rebecca's death devastated her sister, Lydia. Grief soon gave way to suspicion, as something about Jonathan's story didn't sit right with her. The explanation of an accidental misfire felt too convenient, too polished. Lydia couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the tragedy than Jonathan had let on. Driven by determination, she resolved to uncover the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. Fueled by her doubts, Lydia tried convincing the authorities to reopen the case and re-examine the facts. However, the police were reluctant to do so. Determined not to let the matter rest, Lydia took matters into her own hands. She reached out to a private detective, Elliot Chambers, renowned for his sharp instincts and relentless pursuit of the truth. Elliot listened carefully to Lydia's suspicions and agreed to take on the case. Together they began piecing together Jonathan's life, determined to find any cracks in his seemingly airtight story. Their investigation began with interviews. Neighbors, church members, and anyone who might have noticed something unusual about Jonathan's behavior. Gradually, a pattern began to emerge, highlighting inconsistencies in his accounts. Jonathan's frequent absences and evasive explanations started to make sense when they uncovered his connection to Vanessa, the woman unknowingly entangled in a relationship with a married pastor. Elliot's relentless pursuit of the truth led him to Vanessa, the central figure in Jonathan's secret affair. After uncovering Jonathan's double life, Elliot knew Vanessa was key to exposing him. Vanessa, still unaware of Jonathan's true identity and marital status, believed she was in a committed relationship with an honorable man. Confronting her with the truth would be delicate but essential. Elliot approached Vanessa cautiously, presenting himself as a private investigator working on a sensitive case. As he revealed Jonathan's lies, his role as a pastor, his marriage to Rebecca, and the tragic circumstances of her death, Vanessa's world crumbled. Struggling to process the betrayal, her disbelief soon gave way to anger and heartbreak. The man she thought she loved was not only a fraud, but also a suspect in his wife's death. Once the initial shock subsided, Vanessa was eager to help. Feeling manipulated and used, she became Elliot's greatest asset in the investigation. Vanessa provided detailed information about her relationship with Jonathan, including records of their conversations, gifts he had given her, and receipts from their secret rendezvous. Each piece of evidence further chipped away at Jonathan's facade. Vanessa also recalled suspicious moments that now seemed glaring in hindsight. Jonathan's sudden cancellations, his reluctance to share personal details, and his vague explanations about his absences. With her help, Elliot gathered crucial evidence that tightened the noose around Jonathan's web of deceit. Among the most damning information Vanessa shared was Jonathan's recent financial activity. She remembered him mentioning a loan, but assumed it was related to his army work. This clue led Elliot to uncover a loan Jonathan had taken out in Rebecca's name, a discovery suggesting premeditation and a potential motive for murder. Lydia, emboldened by Vanessa's revelations, grew even more determined to see Jonathan face justice. As the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, the tension escalated. Jonathan remained oblivious to the alliance forming against him, confident in his ability to manipulate everyone around him. But with Vanessa now aiding the investigation, his carefully constructed lies were on the verge of collapsing completely. The loan, disguised as a family expense, had gone unnoticed until Elliot dug through the financial records Vanessa provided. The revelation painted a chilling picture, strongly suggesting Jonathan had financial motives behind his actions. Devastated but resolute, Lydia knew the fight wasn't over. Armed with the evidence, she and Elliot approached the authorities, presenting their findings with urgency. The loan not only highlighted Jonathan's deceit, but also raised unsettling questions about his intentions. Why would a loving husband burden his wife with such a debt, especially in the months leading up to her death? The authorities, now compelled to revisit Jonathan's story, reopened the investigation. The financial trail provided by Lydia and Elliot carried significant weight, shifting the focus squarely onto Jonathan, who was soon brought in for questioning. Investigators began reconstructing the timeline of events leading up to Rebecca's death, connecting the fraudulent loan to the growing inconsistencies in Jonathan's account. Jonathan's confidence began to falter as the mounting scrutiny closed in on him. The carefully constructed walls of his double life were crumbling, and the financial trail became the loose thread unraveling his web of lies. His downfall came swiftly when authorities arrested him on charges of fraud and murder. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The fraudulent loan in Rebecca's name, his affair with Vanessa, and the glaring discrepancies in his alibi. The arrest sent shockwaves through the community, leaving those who had once admired Jonathan to grapple with the betrayal and darkness hidden beneath his charismatic exterior. The trial quickly became a public spectacle. Prosecutors methodically presented their case, painting a damning portrait of a man who wielded charm and manipulation to conceal his selfish, sinister motives. Witnesses took the stand, including Vanessa, who tearfully recounted her experience of being deceived by Jonathan's lies. She detailed how he fabricated his life as an army officer and exploited her trust. Lydia sat through every moment of the trial, her emotions swinging between grief and determination. She had fought tirelessly for justice for Rebecca, and now, as Jonathan's double life unraveled before the court, she felt a bittersweet sense of vindication. Elliot Chambers, the private detective she had enlisted, gave critical testimony, presenting the financial evidence that underscored Jonathan's calculated betrayal. Jonathan, for his part, maintained a defiant posture throughout much of the trial. He attempted to spin his actions, claiming the loan and his affair were desperate mistakes. Yet his excuses fell flat in the face of undeniable evidence. Each revelation, each piece of damning proof presented by the prosecution eroded any semblance of doubt about his guilt. The jury deliberated for hours before delivering a unanimous verdict, guilty on all charges. The judge handed down a life sentence without the possibility of parole, ensuring Jonathan would never harm or manipulate another soul again. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read, the finality of the moment sinking in for everyone present. For Lydia, the victory was deeply bittersweet. Justice had been served, but the cost was immense. She reflected on the pain of losing Rebecca, the arduous path to uncovering the truth, and the toll it had taken on her spirit. The trial had exposed more than Jonathan's crimes. It laid bare the fragility of trust and the devastating consequences of unchecked greed and deception.